People with actual diagnosed mental conditions such as anxiety, how annoying is it to see people on social media throwing around the term so loosely? Anxiety has been in common usage far longer than it's been a medical diagnosis, so I have no cause for complaint with anxiety. Bipolar gets misused a lot though, and it's honestly rather annoying. I get around the anxiety issue by saying that I've been diagnosed with severe anxiety that sometimes manifests as depression. The word anxiety is a normal English word, and that is totally fine. But there is a difference between this exam is giving me anxiety and the type of anxiety I have, which is the walls are closing in. I can't understand language anymore, and I feel almost disembodied where my extremities don't feel like they belong to me. It is just total, debilitating panic where you lose your grip on reality entirely. Anybody who hasn't experienced that sensation will 100% have no ability to understand what that feels like, so it can get frustrating trying to describe it to people. It's annoying and frustrating. Diagnosed with bipolar depression and severe anxiety, when people joke about people bipolar much, or manic etc, when a person responds erratically, it's like, I guess you don't know what it's like to be so manic you can't breathe, that you can't stop cleaning at 2 AM, or you want to slice your wrists to stop the anxious thoughts. Some days are horrid. It's beyond annoying because people don't understand the severity of the illness, and having a hat trick of all three sucks. What's more annoying isn't always the usage of the words anxiety, depression, panic attacks, PTSD, but how the media portrays them. Suddenly people who are anxious have crippling anxiety, situational depression becomes clinical depression, and terms like panic attacks and PTSD are thrown around whenever someone experiences a mild inconvenience or has something bad happen. Nostacy, having one nightmare about a dog that barked at you 2 days ago isn't PTSD. It makes it embarrassing for me to say I'm going to have a panic attack because some people will associate it with freaking out and being melodramatic, but in reality my brain is messing up its signals, and I do feel like I'm going to die. When I say that my anxiety has prevented me from working, I get suck it up because they've seen that it's so easy and goes away because obviously their favorite character got over anxiety in 2 episodes. Depression and anxiety don't bother me so much. People may really be feeling depressed and anxious, have no access to psychiatric care, almost fit the diagnostic criteria. ADHD and OCD bother me more because people usually significantly downplay those disorders. Forgot something or have a bit of trouble focusing? ADHD. Notice one tile out of order? OCD. Eye roll. Those are very debilitating conditions. I'll be honest, I don't really care. I have ADHD, and so does one of my kids. And if I had $1 for every time I heard someone say OMG I'm so ADHD, I'd have enough to pay out of pocket for our monthly prescriptions and then some. What creeps me out is when people find out I have it and low-key fish for tips on how to get a diagnosis because they want Adderall. Like, I dunno, get mediocre grades all through school, be labeled as disruptive, and get told every year how you're smart, but don't work hard enough, never pay your bills on time, forget 30-50% of your appointments, drive away with coffee on the roof of your car approximately once a month, lose your keys, lose your wallet, hyper-focus on deep cleaning your kitchen junk drawer an hour before the company comes over, and your entire house is a mess. These are the tips I have that no one ever wants. The one that truly frustrates me is the condescending misuse of triggered. I have PTSD and triggers are real and the effects they have on me are serious, but I can't even talk about that anymore because it's just an ugly joke to most people. Overall, I wish people had more empathy and less judgment about mental illness. I've had people who make triggered jokes actually claim to be protecting people like me who have actual triggers by making these types of jokes because trigger jokes are actually targeting the snowflakes who misuse the term on Tumblr when they're really just offended, which cheapens its meaning. So when we make fun of those people, we are reducing misuse and actually helping people with PTSD. My fucking hero. The clinic I see my therapist through has actually stopped using the word triggered altogether, unless a client brings it up first and instead use activated, because all the jokes around it have turned it into, ironically, a legitimate trigger for a lot of people who have had their trauma downplayed. denied, or made fun of in the past. Depends on the mental health condition. I deal with depression, anxiety, and dissociation. They are pretty common, and I think most people deal with them to a certain degree, so I'm not annoyed ever. But for others that have PTSD, OCD, ADHD, I could see it being more annoying, because they are very misunderstood. Doctor here. Anxiety fits on a spectrum, and can be used colloquially just fine as long the person doing so provides context for the severity and/or situation. Someone saying I have so much anxiety over finals week is just fine. Now someone claiming to have OCD, sociopath or bipolar, manic depressive disorder is another thing entirely. It's 15x less annoying than people who gotta keep mental illness or act like someone doesn't suffer from said mental illness because they either hide their symptoms well or manifest different symptoms than said person complaining. For example, some highly depressed people who are on their couch all day will claim that an extroverted person who's out all the time couldn't be as depressed as they say they are. Even though these depressed extroverted people may be out all the time because they can't stand to be alone with their own thoughts. Fortunately, people don't tend to self-diagnose themselves as schizophrenics. However, what there is a severe lack of understanding about the condition, which wouldn't be such a travesty if it didn't lead to an assumption of potentially murderous violence, which, in turn, leads to more attacks on the clinically vulnerable. I don't expect everyone in the world to understand every detail of every illness there is out there. That's ridiculous, but it would be nice if I didn't have to actually be afraid of being exposed anymore. Death threats, doxing, rough arming and assault that I have had over the years due to fears based in ignorance. I tell you what, it doesn't help with paranoia. I usually don't tell people that I have borderline personality disorder because of how negatively it is viewed literally everywhere. There are even therapists who won't help people with BPD because of judging all people who have BPD by the people with severe cases. People with BPD are often kind of harshly assumed to be monsters. So I usually just say I have bipolar type 2 since that's what I was mistakenly diagnosed with first. And I don't have a severe case. It hurts and is frustrating. I'm bipolar and have a severe anxiety disorder thanks to childhood abuse. I see people joking about being so bipolar today because they are being indecisive or using it as an insult. Quit being so bipolar when someone changes their mind or dislikes something. Or just straight up calling me crazy when they find out I have bipolar. So awesome when someone tells me my husband is nuts or a saint for dealing with me. Like, no, you're not bipolar because you can't decide what you want to do for the day. I didn't want a genetic neurological disorder that causes hallucinations, delusions, no impulse control, severe depression and has a rate of 60% of bipolar people attempt suicide. Gotta love having to take a cocktail of antipsychotics and anticonvulsants to stay stable. Each mood shift lasts for weeks to months and causes just a little bit of brain damage each time, so my memory is deteriorating. Oh, and unlike anxiety, THC makes bipolar symptoms worse and the effects can be permanent. No medical marijuana for me. I have pretty severe ADHD that wasn't diagnosed till I was in my 30s. I've always struggled, spent so much energy trying to keep it in, and have still succeeded in life. I now take medication that quiets so much of the noise in my head. When I took my medication for the first time, I think it might have been the first time my mind was quiet. I know what it's like to struggle with ADHD and have it actually diagnosed. To the it girl who claims ADHD because she is just being lazy, buzz off. ADHD isn't dancing around your room like a maniac, it's crying in your hotel room because you couldn't focus enough and now you don't have a bathing suit or underwear for the week. I honestly thought people were making that shit up as an excuse to get out of work. Till about 2 months into the pandemic. Constant bombardment in the media, the shutdown, and a couple bad beats in my life suddenly turned into full-blown panic attacks and auditory hallucinations. Ended up on meds and talking to a therapist, and I'm probably back to around 90% healthy and the bulk of the physiological effects are gone, but I feel terrible about brushing people off up until that point. There's a huge difference between a valid concern for the future and actual physical manifestations that you know are caused by a mental disconnect and can't control. I can't blame people for not understanding it if it's never happened to them, and I wouldn't wish that shit on anyone. Anxiety doesn't bother me. I truly believe everyone experiences it at some point. What bothers me is the way bipolar, psycho, and even paranoid gets thrown around. I think it just gives people a very warped idea of what those terms really mean, and dehumanizes those of us who live with them. Most people are shocked to learn my boring self, who is a responsible adult with her own meatloaf recipe and an understanding of how insurance works, is very bipolar, sometimes psychotic, and dealing with paranoia on an everyday basis. Bipolar doesn't mean moody. Psychotic doesn't mean crazy. Paranoia is not super anxiety. Just because you experience some of the issues that affect people with ADHD does not mean you have it, or have permission to make light of it. The whole point of ADHD is that it's chronic and affects the quality of our lives. Having the occasional blues, or getting distracted for a moment, doesn't mean you understand what it's like to have ADHD. A lot of mental illnesses are on a spectrum. Someone's anxiety or depression may not line up with what yours is, but that doesn't mean they're faking it. Someone saying they're anxious or depressed about something doesn't mean they're diagnosing themselves with generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder. Also, not everyone has the resources to get an official diagnosis. We just need to trust them when they say they are struggling with something. It is annoying seeing people use OCD, bipolar, and ADHD incorrectly. Being organized doesn't mean you have OCD, having mood swings doesn't mean you're bipolar, and being hyper doesn't mean you have ADHD. These things dismiss what these mental illnesses actually are, and make it difficult for people to take us seriously. I'm saying this as someone who struggles a lot with ADHD. It's more annoying to see people claim the condition, but then expect to be accepted exactly as they are without making any effort to change or improve the toxic aspects of their personality, especially as I have to do so much work on myself to control the more jagged edges of my various little insanities. You claim you're mentally ill. I'm sorry to hear that. But you have to engage with available support and put in the work to get better at managing it. I know it's hard. Good lord, I know. A mental health diagnosis is not a free pass. To be an asshole though. When people jokingly say whilst studying that they had ADHD, it really pisses me off. It's not a laughing matter. I wake up confused. I go to uni in a haze. I sit in class barely being able to take in information. And I even sit at lunch with friends and forget personal details that are important for them and our friendship. You really don't get what it means to not compute what's going on around you. For easily a decade and a half, I have conditioned myself to be able to focus on one thing for more than 1 minute at a time. Even then, it doesn't work very well, so I'm medicated. Then they look for people like me to sell them drugs. That is the drug that allows me to function like a regular human. Whilst I don't sell it, because my stuff would be like giving a horse tranquilizer to a mouse. I know a lot of people who are in the same condition as me who do sell it. The only thing that bugs me is when people clearly don't know what it means and then self-diagnose. OCD is not just wanting everything to be clean, but it can be. Bipolar isn't just mood swings. There's more than that. I will say it bugs me when people will try to relate to me based on my focal epilepsy symptoms. That is something that needs to be diagnosed by a neurologist, and if they really are experiencing the same thing I am, they desperately need to get that diagnosis and medication, because it can lead to very dangerous situations if left untreated. I urge them all to go get examined. I don't dismiss it just because they don't have that diagnosis yet. Having OCD isn't getting stressy because your work cubicle isn't tidy. Having OCD is washing your hands 10 times because you think you touch something dirty, walking back and forth, up and down repeatedly, over and over again, because you think if you don't perform this ritual, you'll die. It's having panic attacks because you touch something dirty and haven't washed your hands 20 times over. It's having panic attacks because you can't perform your hourly OCD rituals. I have mixed feelings about people throwing around autism and Asperger's in memes and stuff, like it's on the same playing field as mental retardation. On one hand, I find some of them pretty funny, but it paints us like we are antisocial idiots who can't function like human beings. I'm so sick of having to explain to people that I'm not mentally retarded just because I have Asperger's. I almost rather wouldn't share this information at all and just deal with the baggage it comes with. ADHD here. I mean, a lot of people I see self-diagnosing legit probably do have it. I'm more annoyed when people are like my kid is just spirited. Or I'm just super creative. ADHD is just an excuse to get drugs. Like no. Also, why can't it be both? You or your kid can be energetic, spirited, creative, imaginative, intelligent, and have ADHD. Don't discount help because of some weird stigma against neurodiversity. I suffer from gadden clinical depression. While I don't care if it's talked about, I certainly hate seeing it mocked and tokenized. I'm sick of seeing people armchair diagnose others on social medias to excuse bad behavior. Oh, you don't know that person could be mentally ill when they are more often than not just spoiled, entitled or shitty people in general. It's exhausting for one, and for two it makes it harder for people to accept actual mental illnesses as anything more than excuses. It's not something you can just assume about every other person you see because you want to take the higher ground or give benefit of doubt. Please stop. My anxiety is so severe I have a service dog to alert me to episodes. The only people who would ever wish an anxiety disorder on are Satan and Hitler. That's how bad it is. It's not just I'm feeling anxious, it's physically painful some days. I get headaches basically every day, and sometimes they don't leave for weeks at a time. My body aches all the time. I'm tired and fatigued from being in pain. There's days I don't feel like getting out of bed. My service dog has made my life so much easier, but it's still tough. Thinking having mental illness is quirky is sick. Nobody deserves this. I see a lot of people saying it doesn't bother them, or to each their own, and I generally agree with that. Like someone pointed out that people don't generally lie about these things. They suck so much that like, if someone wants to fake having PTSD, then there is something in their life going on that warrants them trying to get attention. What bothers me is when these people either take resources away from those who do have these mental illnesses, or they use it in a manipulative manner or justification for shitty behavior. I've had a few exes who would use their self-diagnosed mental health issues as excuses for when they would be abusive or a plain jackass. I'm also currently studying mental health issues in a clinical setting right now, and from what I'm understanding, a lot of mental health conditions exist on these spectrums of symptoms and signs, where some conditions look very similar to others. And when someone self-diagnoses themselves, it doesn't necessarily mean they are right, but they may be noticing something isn't right and use resources they are not always fully understanding of to help find language to identify and describe what they are feeling. Honestly, if you come across someone who has self-diagnosed, encourage them to seek out an actual mental health provider. It may not even be a mental health issue they are dealing with, but some other serious medical issue. I suffer from severe generalized anxiety. It's so romanticized among teens and early 20s. It's not romantic to suddenly feel like you don't belong somewhere, or you can't stand being around people, can't order food, because it's suddenly overwhelming. Feeling like you have to rehearse what you're going to say, just so you don't stutter or sound stupid. I mostly get upset when the media or quirky influencers talk about OCD. It's always the cleaning type, or counting slash numbers. There are multiple types of OCD, and they can vary in how serious they are. I have checking slash rechecking OCD, which is something that I've been doing well with after therapy. As a kid I had the kind where you're compelled to count everything. OCD contributes greatly to my anxiety and depression, so I find it so annoying when all you see is people being neat freaks, or turning doorknobs 3 times. Yes, they exist, but the characters are written without any respect, and don't typically acknowledge how living with OCD and different types of OCD affects a person, not how to help someone experiencing these traits. I think it depends on the mental illness. As someone with an anxiety disorder that is usually perfectly fine, it makes me realize that anxiety is a pretty general term, and some who is simply anxious using it doesn't bother me. The ones that do, not that I have either, are the constant use of PTSD and OCD. People really suffer with illnesses like these, yet the terms are thrown around like nothing. I like to compare mental illness with physical illness because they should be treated the same. Everyone gets ill at some point, whether mental or physical, and the only difference is what sort of doctor you should see. Shouting this makes my OCD flare up when, like most other people, you like things neat, is like someone shouting my lung cancer is killing me when you have a cold. Well, I try not to go on social media and read things like that. It bothers me a bit that people don't grasp the severity of mental illnesses. I understand when you're younger that using things like "oh, I'm so OCD because I like to keep my room clean," or "I have such bad anxiety because I don't like dances" can be a normal thing to say because you're not yet aware of what you're actually saying. However, when it transcends into adulthood, it becomes a bit more upsetting for me. Movies are made about conditions I have that are inaccurate and very hurtful. People throwing around terms loosely can have the same effect. So, I'd say I'm mildly upset about it, but I would never post to the person to stop saying what they're saying, or even post about my frustrations. Instead, I believe posting about the honest sides of these disorders in hopes that someday these people who don't understand will gain some understanding. But freedom of speech is freedom of speech, and most times people who are posting about having mental disorders usually have something going on in their lives, and who am I to judge whether or not they are telling the truth, or whether or not they get a say in using the terms? I see it as free publicity, but also, I don't get to decide whether someone does or does not experience anxiety. I'm no gatekeeper. My anxiety leads to insomnia, which leads to me not eating or drinking. Shit's wild. My husband distracts his anxiety with video games, but he can fall asleep at the drop of an eyelid and wake up feeling refreshed. I can't compare my anxiety to anyone else's because they probably didn't experience the same things I did to make me into a human chihuahua. My anxiety also has my bipolar, depression and BPD to keep it fueled. This cake has layers, other cakes may not. Moral of the story is you never truly know what someone is going through, so do your best to be kind. And for shit's sake, Geo vote. I don't have a problem with it at all. Everyone has their own battles, and just because they aren't diagnosed doesn't mean they don't have it. It can be really difficult to get diagnosed, even if you have the courage to speak up about it. What annoys me is the professionals that talk about it online or on TV that clearly have very little idea what they are talking about. I take it as an opportunity to educate someone on what my illness, depression, truly entails. It's not just feeling sad or bummed out. It's a complete lack of energy, an existential void in yourself, where you feel like nothing you do matters and you don't matter. It's feeling so drained and worthless that getting out of bed to do literally anything feels as monumentally impossible as scaling Mount Everest. There's utter hopelessness and oppressive guilt and shame that makes you feel like you're a bad person for never achieving certain things in life, and that you never will. In short, depression sucks.